All right, good morning, everyone. I was on mute. That would explain why nobody can hear me. Today is Thursday, May 6th. Welcome, everyone, to the ELTAC Subcommittee meeting. At this point, I'd like to ask all of our ELTAC members to unmute their microphones and share their cameras, and we'll start off with a roll call. So I'm Christopher Hand. I'm an ELTAC subcommittee member and a representative for ELAP, and then I'll pass it over to Augustin Pieri.
Hi, I'm Augustine. We're doing introductions here, right? Sorry, I couldn't hear you at the beginning.
Okay, you can hear me now, though, right?
Yeah, got you right. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, the technology is great some days, right? Some days it's better than others. But all right, so Augustin's here.
Yep,
I'm just going to go through everyone just to make sure we got all our microphones working. So Sam.
Yeah, hi, Sam from OCSAN.
And Pamela.
I'm here. Hi, from Eurofins.
And then Peter.
Present.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Present.
Oh, great. And then Andrew.
Here.
And then Carol.
Here.
All right. Oh, it looks like we have Judy coming into the subcommittee meeting as well. But with that, I will pass it off to Augustin, our chair.
Oh, thanks, Christopher. So going through the agenda, so we did the roll call and we have most of the folks on the call here. The next thing we want to do is review the items from the last meeting. Kind of the action items we had from the last meeting was going over the notes. So we had a presentation or the outline that we put together, that our group put together for kind of what we thought should be in this document. I went through the recording. There were some things that I missed and put together all the notes and the ideas and comments and suggestions that folks had and kind of beefed up that outline a little bit. What we wanted to kind of do this meeting was one of the action items from our last meeting was to fill in those notes and then go over the kind of topics that Judy's group was looking at, the review that they did of the existing documents and trying to, I guess, fill in the gaps in terms of what we wanted to have as specific criteria for this method validation. So it's kind of, the action items that we had from the last meeting. Any comments or questions about that stuff? Cool. And I had, I guess, one other question. My group has the document, the beefed up document. Can we share that with the whole group? It's, I guess, a Bagley-Keene question. Since we're all together now, can I distribute it to everybody, or how would that work, Christopher?
So we do have our staff counsel, Tom Schuman, here. So I'm going to give him a poke just to make sure he's aware. And then I'll repeat the question of how are we going to be able to distribute the document so everyone can review it prior to a subcommittee meeting where we can then discuss.
Hi, I think it's okay to distribute the documents beforehand, before the meeting, as long as there's no deliberation on it before the meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll send out this document to the whole group here in a few minutes, so everybody has it. But the goal of that was just to kind of fill in those details. We can go over the document a little bit today, I think, after we talk about Judy's portion, just to make sure that we have that kind of ironed out. And then I'll continue to fill in the gaps. And the goal that I have for the document going forward is it's still an outline, and I'd like to get it into a more usable, or not usable, but a more final type of document with words and paragraphs and things, not just bullet points. So that's kind of the goal that we had to go from, or that at least I had for the rest of the meeting here. I guess we can, if nobody has any other questions, we can go to the discussion of the individual activities and the document review, if that works. Cool. So one thing, let me share this guy. One thing that we talked about with Judy, so I talked to Judy a little while ago, and she brought up a good point that I think we do need to kind of iron out what we want for the document. And this is something that when I can't remember if Corinne made the point or if Erica made the point, but it helps in the last meeting. I think it does help to have a mission statement up front. Like we need to know what the document is going to look like and what we want to get out of it, I think, up front, and that would help guide where we go and how we make it look. And one thing that Judy also mentioned and that I've noticed as well is that a lot of the existing documents that are out there, the EPA guidance and TNI guidance and other things, they're not very easy to work with, I guess. They're very dense. It's, a lot of pages and a lot of words that maybe don't need to be there. So I think we could have, as long as we can get agreement in the group, if we can have something that makes sense and is easy to use, I think it would be more valuable of a document than something that covers every single possible option that could potentially occur. But I think that maybe it's something that Judy, I don't know if you have any opinions on that, on how we should go with designing this document and what our end goals are going to be.
Judy
Can you hear
maybe
me?
doesn't know. Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm traveling on business, so you'll have to excuse me. I was late because I couldn't get connected. So, and now that I'm having issues with my volume, so I apologize. One of the things that we talked about, and Carol actually brought up a good point when it comes to the goal of what we're trying to do. So I think we had a number of folks that had different ideas of what we were actually trying to achieve. And Augustine actually, characterized that very well in his remarks just now. One of the things is we need to understand what the goal is and what success looks like. So from the standpoint of the goal of this document or the goal of this process and what we actually believe would satisfy that goal. So what should the end product look like? So I sent a document to my team because we actually reviewed the ATPs, and Augustine just mentioned that the ATP documents that exist from EPA, and there are multiple ones, are very wordy. There's a number of sections to them. There's a lot of information in them. But the thing that I find with those documents, and if you recall, we reviewed those for the last meeting. And the thing that we found with those is that those documents are geared towards specific programs. So drinking water has one, wastewater has one, and there was one written for RCRA for SW 846 for method modification or method development. And so we went through and looked at all of those. And while there's similarities, there's a lot of specificity for program things in those. And so I looked at them again. I looked at the summaries that was done by the methods team, if you will, and started looking into what maybe other organizations had. Came across one by AOAC, and while it doesn't really specifically address all of the things, it does a good job of giving an overview of what might be required to fully develop or fully modify a method. So it kind of got us to thinking along the lines of, what do we really need? So as we went through this, the question kept coming up, well, are we supposed to be coming up with a full process? Or are we supposed to be coming up with a checklist? Or what exactly are we trying to do? So that's when I went to Augustine and I said, hey, do you have an answer to this? Because now I feel like there might be a little bit of confusion as to what are we really trying to do. So what I would like, hopefully, to hear from everyone today is, what do we think our goal is? What's the main thing we're trying to achieve? Because there's a lot of support documents out there. So what's the main thing we're trying to achieve, and what does success look like when we get to the end of this? So I'm going to stop there and kind of listen for some feedback from those of you who are on the call.
So I'll start there. From my impression on this is that we weren't to reinvent the wheel. So there is ATPs from the Clean Water Act and those type of things. If we are modifying or creating a new technology or doing something within that program, those are the documents that we use. ELAC, California ELAC doesn't need something to do something on those Clean Water Acts. There's something written. There's something written on the drinking waters. I would think that we are working on methods that are outside of all of those scopes. So I think I missed most of last meeting, but I heard something at the end about the recycled water. There isn't a recycled water program. That would be a good one that might be encompassing this. Maybe some air tests, things like that, where there isn't program developed criteria. But if it falls within kind of what I envision the big three, the Clean Water Act, the drinking water, or RCRA, we have documents already. And that's kind of my thoughts on that.
I'll take a stab at this, following up on Pamela's comments. I tend to agree. And so I think definitely in this document, we need to state that if you're doing it for one of those programs, you need to go look at those associated reference documents and make sure that you meet the criteria in there. But they all have some similarities associated with what they need, whether it be a method detection limit study or an accuracy and precision study or something like that. Maybe what we could do is take those commonalities and put it in this document and say, if you don't fit under those reference documents, start here, gather this information, and then it's almost like if we could gather the information, then potentially it would just mean if they do get pulled into RCRA, then they go to RCRA and finish the pieces that they need for RCRA, or they go to Clean Water and finish the pieces needed for Clean Water. But we could say this is a good starting point. Make sure that you have your calibration evaluated. Make sure that you've done some sort of testing, whether it be an interlaboratory study or a PT. That was what I kind of visioned when we were talking about this document. It's for, again, definitely for those methods that don't fit under the big three, but they could still have a lot of the same testing documents or validation type documents that would then prepare them if they did want to, if they were able to fit into one of those three. Then it's just a matter of finishing out the criteria of the specific program they're going to be using it for.
I agree with Carol. That's what I figured we were doing, just trying to find commonality, and also from my perspective, having some kind of timeline or deadline associated with some of these steps would be really helpful, because I have limited experience, admittedly, in this topic, but my experience with PFAS is that it's taking forever to get methods certified. And meanwhile, the public is being exposed to these really potent pollutants. And so not only having deadlines for some of these approvals, but also allowing for whomever the final decider is on whether a method is approved, allowing them to have some kind of balancing of risk versus how much information we actually need to feel comfortable with a method being approved.
So this is Judy. So I'm going to make an unpopular statement. One of the things that I just heard was how long it's taken PFAS to be approved, which goes back to what I thought was one of the initial problems with this, with the current circumstance, in that the drinking water program has a document that works for them. The wastewater program has a document that works for them. And the RCRA program has a document that works for them. And if you're doing something for each one of those programs, if you follow their document, then the approval process for that compliance program it is defined and will be used. The problem with PFAS is there is a method for drinking water that was done under the drinking water program. There wasn't a method that was done under the wastewater program, and there further was not one done under the RCRA program. But because one has been done for drinking water does not mean it will be allowed for the other two, because they have their own processes. So what I thought the original concern was those dividing lines and being able to bring together the portions of each one that would make it so that once you got to the end with your method development, that it would be acceptable for all programs because it's met those needs and requirements. Because one of the things that we don't know when we start testing an emerging contaminant is where the impact is truly going to be. Is it going to be limited to a certain type of matrix, or is it something that is going to make it all the way through a treatment process and go back into the river because you can't treat it and get rid of it? So when emerging contaminants come along, we don't really know what the final destination is going to be for them from a program perspective. And so one of the things I think that came to mind that I know was brought up more than once was fitness for use. And so what I think could happen is you could take the best of each of these processes and make sure that you define the fitness for use very well in the front of the process. And then from a corresponding perspective, do whatever ruggedness type testing is necessary in order to make sure that the analytical method as it's being developed fits the need for what the intent is. If you know from the very beginning that it's only going to be needed for drinking water or wastewater, and that there won't be another need for it, then I could see where you could follow the processes already established. But the thing that bothers me the most about those is that they're not accepted from one program to the next. And I think that's one of the fatal flaws of the process as it sits right now. Any other thoughts on that?
I'll make one comment on that. I mean, that's a great point that you've brought up, but that's not something that we're going to be able to address as an ELTAC group, because that's got to be looked at by each of the different programs and how they want to work together on accepting cross program methods. So I wonder if we're shooting for something that is basically kind of outside of our control in that aspect, that we can't force clean water to accept a drinking water or RCRA to accept a drinking water method. All we could do is take that drinking water method, apply it to those matrices, do whatever additional work they need to, and hopefully that program will then approve it. I think that's, maybe just a little bit above what this group can do. That's just my thought.
I can jump in here too. And I think, Judy, we're not going to be able to create anything that's the US EPA is going to decide is a good document for their needs, because they've already, like we've discussed, they've already established what their process is, and they don't really want anyone else telling them what their process is either. And to touch on Corinne's point of how long those deadlines take, and that's kind of the point of why we want a document for California. We want something that can be used by any of our California agencies to assist them in deciding, would this method be appropriate? And so I think, I believe it was Pam that brought it up, of using the best bits from each of the processes and taking all of those common threads and putting them into a single document that we can then use for laboratories that are developing a new method, and then the state agencies to be able to look at what kind of validation or what kind of packages the laboratory has put in to either take an existing method or move it over to a different matrix or a new, entirely newly developed method for one of those emergent contaminants. So I think we can't really put any deadlines in there, because again, it's going to be up to those individual regulatory agencies of whether or not they want to use the method. And that's the process that they go through, is balancing, is this method worth the risk of what are the risk factors? But we do want to have like, here's some things that the labs need to do in order to move from one to the other. Here's some things that the labs should consider doing if they're going to move it from one program to another. Here are all of the pieces that may be necessary, and not entirely all of them are necessary, right? Again, it goes to the fitness for use that I'm sorry, I can't remember who brought it up. It's a little too early. I haven't had all my coffee yet this morning. But again, what the fitness for use is, right? And so I think one of our document points needs to put in the front of like the method as it's being developed needs to have the intended use. I see somebody else unmuted, so I'm going to pass the floor to whoever else wants to speak.
So I had a question. Maybe we can clarify this point of how many labs is this applying to? So some of these methods that we're working on deal with single lab validation or multiple lab validation. My understanding is that our goal was not to, Lab X develops this really cool procedure. Let's get them certified for this really cool procedure that Lab X can do. And they're not going to make that SOP available to any other lab. I was thinking that what we were looking for is, we have an emerging contaminant, we have PFAS, something like that. California wants to put out guidelines to all of the laboratories. If you want to participate in this market, if you want to assist in this market, here are the guidelines that you need to meet. And we're going to call this method such and such, and we're going to put it on the FOTs, and we're going to make it available to every laboratory. And I think that, we need to, in that case, it's not necessarily Lab X that's creating this method documentation and saying, here's what the requirements are. I think it's coming back to ELAP and ELTAC of saying, we have an emerging contaminant, we have some research from some laboratories, we have some input from multiple laboratories. Here's the DQOs that we're looking for this procedure, but it's not being developed by a single lab. Because otherwise we're getting into what I think ELAP went away from, where labs could be certified for a procedure that they brought online that no one else could do.
And I'll touch on that a little bit, and I hope I address this appropriately. We do want to have, because if this is documents not just for the labs that are doing the actual development, creating the SOP, creating those guidelines, it's also a document that any of our agencies can use to say, well, how do I know how good this method is, right? When they're bringing in a research method, what are the pieces that I should be looking for to establish what kind of needs there are? And then they'll make a determination whether or not they want to ask ELAP for accreditation, whether or not they want to just do it at one lab. That's up to the agency. But the document here is supposed to help give at least a rubric or guidelines for labs that are doing some development, and then agencies that are reviewing anything that has been developed. So we can include bits and pieces of their agencies should look at this, labs should look at this when you're developing it, but it's kind of removed from ELAP at this point, like in terms of accreditation, because ELAP's accreditation is based on whatever the state agency needs are. And so that would be a separate process. And it's not like an approval process here. It's just an assistance tool for developing methods and then for agencies in evaluating developed methods. I hope that addressed it.
So basically, you're just looking for a non-certified method. What are the good laboratory procedures to be bringing on a new method? And then how can another agency evaluate whether it's a good method? And I think that we have multitudes of documents out there that already address those points. I mean, if we're getting into specifics as to what's the calibration criteria for PFAS that we should be using, I think that gets into a little bit more specifics that is outside of what you just established. These method developments say you need to determine what is the best calibration criteria, but not it's going to be 70 to 130. And I think that we need to recognize the limitations when we're going into new methods on those things.
And also to kind of touch on that, I would probably want to stay away from providing a document that could give a pathway to accreditation, because then it's, I think, way more strict, right? The things that we'd put in here would be more for like, that I imagine would be more for like a research method or one-off or something unique where one of the state agencies needs to know this emerging contaminant X, is it in my body of water or whatever it is. If we're going to be providing a document for multiple labs to use for, you know, something that's going to be accredited by ELAP and potentially regulated, I think it has to be way more strict. You're going to have true multi-lab validation. You'll have to have PT samples. It'll be I think it should be a more thorough process than what we could potentially outline here, because that would be, you know, something that every single lab is going to have to be able to do, not just one that is maybe more capable or less capable or whatever, you know, the case may be. It would be tough, I think, to address those things. I don't know. I think Peter just unmuted. Would you have an opinion on that?
So similar to Chris, I haven't gotten all my coffee down yet, but, you know, in listening through this, I don't know that it's not all of the above, right? So, I mean, we are going to stay away from saying, you know, 70 to 130 for any type of criteria like that. But I think, you know, we've been matriculating through the process. What I'm hearing is the state agencies, while there are a multitude of documents that exist, I don't think the state agencies are necessarily able to compile and go through and read those with the ease that some of the folks on this call is. So I think it's bringing some of those best practices together and saying, hey, if it is a one-off, these are kind of the things that you want to look at. If you're looking to potentially do a new method that's going to be accredited at a state level and go on an FOT, these are some of the other things that you need to do. So this is why I kind of like that whole decision tree idea of putting that out as part of the leading part of the document of, hey, if you're developing a nationwide RCRA method, go see this document that already exists. If you're doing it under drinking water, go see this thing that already exists. But here are some of the resources and the ideas that come out of those various documents in a more simple, digestible, not multi-100-page, complicated, overwrought type of a thing. So it's a more sort of high level. If I'm an agency, I can come and I can say, look, laboratory, these are the things that I expect from you if you want to do a one-off. And there's going to inevitably be some back and forth, but it's just a little bit of a yellow brick road type of a guidance map for it, as opposed to an absolute dead, do this down to this level of specificity.
This is Judy. So I did kind of start down a similar path to that, and I shared that with a couple of folks. I don't know if anybody got a chance to look at it, Pam, Carol, Corey. If you did and you think there would be any value in me sharing that onto the screen, I could. But if you didn't, I mean, I could share it and just kind of get some feedback. I mean, if you didn't get a chance to look at it.
Is this the spreadsheet?
Yeah.
I have the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think that the checklist spreadsheet, I think, is worth sharing.
Okay, so can I, Peter or Christopher, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I'll bump you up. There you go. You should be able to share the screen now.
Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did is I started, you know, as I was getting feedback from the committee members, I started thinking kind of in a different way. And so looking at the different methods or the different documents for the different programs, I started thinking, what kind of information do we need from each of these? Would we need from the laboratories or the developers to understand where they're trying to go with this? So the first thing that came to mind, of course, was the purpose of the method. So is it for discovery, screening, monitoring, modeling, compliance? Is it program specific? And you could check those things off. Now, keep in mind, this is like super rudimentary. So, I mean, anybody can make boxes on a spreadsheet. I get it. So this is not pretty, but you get the idea. And then there's a comment section that if you want to add anything more to it, you could. But then you talk about the advantages. These advantages came right out of the Clean Water Act, out of their ATP and method development documents. And so in order to justify anything for EPA, there's got to be some kind of characteristic of this new development that it's going to benefit something. Is it an interference? Are you overcoming an interference? You reducing hazardous waste? Is it to understand the presence of an emerging contaminant? So there's a number of things that reasons why you would want to put a new method together. Then when it comes to method use, do you say to yourself, okay, is this single lab, multi-lab, all labs? This comes straight out of clean water, tier 1, 2, and 3. Is it statewide? If it is, it would be tier 3. If it's regional, it would be tier 3. That would be your eventual goal. So you would start it out as a single lab, possibly, depending on what it is, maybe, and then make it, get to the point where you could validate it by the number of laboratories necessary to do a full validation for statewide. Is it for accreditation? That makes a lot of difference. Or is it screening only? Then I've got a note here. It says, see the screening tab. So you go over here to the screening tab, and it basically tells you what you would need to do to prove in order to screen for something. So false negatives, false positives, this came right out of one of the documents as well. So once you go over and look at that, then you can go back and then you can say, okay, who's the data user? Is it regulatory, academia, specialty group, other? Listen, this is open for all kinds of comment. I just kind of started filling in who might be the data users on this. And then analytes. Is it one analyte? Is it more? If it's more, provide a table, show what they are. The technology, is it known? Yes or no? And if it's yes, what is it? If it's proposed, then what is it? Method. Known method. So are you going to add it on to something you already know? Is this something you're going to add to 8260 or 524 or 608 or something? Or are you proposing something totally new? What's the matrices? Is it potable water, non-potable, soil, solid, being other, something other than soil, tissue, air, or other? And then field collection criteria. What's the container? What's the chemical preservation? Is there thermal preservation? What's a potential holding time? And then, of course, there's other. I always give an idea for other because you never know what you're not thinking about that somebody else may be. And so if you know it, you list it. If it's to be determined, you say it. Or if it's not applicable, it means it doesn't matter. And then, of course, there's room for additional information. And of course, you've got the beautiful checkbox over there, the very rudimentary one in column E. So, and then from a sample prep perspective, you can say to yourself, is there a sample prep? If there is it solvent extraction, acid digestion? Is there a cleanup or is there a other? And so you give the opportunity to say, if there's a method criteria that already matches it, then what's the method reference? If not, it's to be determined, then you've got to write a procedure that meets some type of criteria. Maybe you're going to mimic a method that's already out there, but there's these checkpoints that says, I've got, if this is to be determined, then I've got to find the right way to determine it. So there might be a tab for solvent extraction, general information that's out of the method or out of the RCRA document or out of another document for that matter. Same thing with accuracy. Each one of these EPA documents, and I can't criticize any of the documents. I mean, they were well written for the programs that they were intended for. So there's great information in each document on how you determine accuracy or precision. But the the AOAC document goes into specificity and sensitivity, and then of course when you get into calibration and things like that, you've got RSD and RSE, average response, linear regression, other criteria, range of quantitation. I mean, what level are you needing to quantitate? And then you've got the inclusivity and exclusivity, and then there's a tab for that. So there could be tabs that explain the more complicated of these. Some of these things are self-explanatory. I mean, kind of everybody knows what range of quantitation means. I mean, what's your range going to be? Is it going to be 1 ppb to 100 ppb, or are we more up in the ppm range? Depends on what it is, right? Depends on what you're trying to do with it. And this is all qualitative, of course. So then you get through your standards and your reagents and whether or not they're available, or if you got to make them, or if they're specialty, or maybe you don't have any, depending on what it is you're doing. Same thing with certified reference materials and blank matrix material. Surrogates, if they're needed. I left off internal standards. I just now realized that. Then there's MDL and LOD at or below the required sensitivity. I mean, then you've got to do your 14 MDL samples, 7 spiked and 7 method blanks. And we all know where that comes from. That's in TNI and in 40 CFR Part 136 Appendix B. So then you've got your retention time windows, if that applies, if you're doing chromatography. Other variables. Other variables being what else might need to be controlled depending on what type of technology you're using, variables that you have to stabilize, whether it was with the sample or with the chemistry that's being used or the biology being used. So none would be one answer. Identifying it, the identification of the variables would be another, and then whether or not there's a ruggedness test required. And then of course you see a tab for that, which there's not one on there because that's just proposed. Analyte stability. The analyte itself, what is it? Is it a VOA? Is it a semi-VOA? Is it something like PCBs that no matter how long you have it, it's never going to change? The storage container, the shelf life, the storage, what type of storage? And that kind of gets you through everything, all things qualitative. I'm sure I've left stuff off because this is all draft and was just an idea that was spit out into a spreadsheet. But then, if you go down to qualitative, it gets much easier. You got specificity, a false positive and a false negative, because really what are you doing? You're just looking for something and whether or not you can ID it. And then of course, down at the bottom, I put a choice for proficiency testing if we think it's necessary. Is it readily available? Is it specialty or custom, or is it not applicable? So that's kind of the bird's eye view of what kind of came to mind after I looked at all these documents and said, how the heck do we make something out of this that might be able to lead a thought process? So I'm going to stop there and let everybody criticize however they want.
I mean, from my perspective, this is great. This is totally what I envisioned with this document. I think something like this that's easy to digest, easy to follow, and easy to accomplish the tasks that are necessary is kind of what I would hope. In my experience in reading documents, it's not always obvious what is needed. They, like you mentioned, that they're very well written and they're very specific for those programs, and they have tons of information. But it's not easy to say, okay, I need to have these 50 pieces of information. So I think this is great. I think this is kind of what I would hope for the document, and have one that we talked about last time for each of the kind of 4 main types of tests, and chemical, micro, radio, tox, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think it was cool. I think this is totally what I was envisioning.
Great. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I haven't wasted a few hours of my time. I'm sorry,
Carol.
So coming from the regulatory side, in having dealt with coworkers on the aspect of we had to, we have this laboratory who says that they have a better way of doing this analysis, and how do I know that it's good? And my having to give them a list of, okay, well, I want to see this, 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 and this, ask the laboratory to provide those. this kind of provides that for them, so that they would be able to look in and say, okay, well, I apparently need to, have a better understanding of this. I want this data for my for ECL to look at, or I see you have all these boxes ticked off, and so that gives me more confidence, whatever. It's a little bit better laid out for, and when we put some of the language in there, I know we're kind of putting it on the end of, we have to be aware that not only are the laboratories going to be using this, but the regulators are, and they are not lab savvy. So if we can make the language as generalized and understanding as possible, the regulators are going to get a lot of use out of this, because they're going to be able to look and say, okay, why is that important? They look over into the tab and they say, okay, I understand now, based on this fairly understandable language, of what this means for me, and what's this, and the fact that they're able to do this, how this helps me have the confidence in the testing that the laboratory is doing, using this special process or whatever, which would allow the regulator then to feel more confident, saying, yes, for this one project, I give you permission to use that methodology to report results.
Carol, I'm so excited to hear your feedback on this, because it was you questioning where we were going with this that made me go down this path. So I'm so excited to hear that you like like the start on this, because it's going to take the rest of this team to fill in these gaps. Because, if we can, like on the general info, this is basically the definitions, or several of the definitions out of the AOAC document, where it talks about what sensitivity is and specificity and things like that. This is not complete, but it gives an idea of what things might be on a general tab, to give the information that you're looking for, to be able to bring a more common explanation, or easier to understand explanation beyond the scientific that we're all accustomed to. So we could make this tab be more definitive and user friendly in that regard. So to kind of provide that kind of support, for somebody who is non-scientific. And then on, some of the other tabs, and we could make this more, easier to navigate as it's developed. But I envision that if we go with the tab approach, that it will be easy for folks. They've got the list, and then if you need additional information, you've got the tab to go to, but you will always be working off of the main list. And then as you need additional information, you can go seek that through the tab itself.
So I'll just add that, I think overall, Judy, this is good. This is kind of what I envision as well. It's a better form of the decision tree, if you will. And to Carol's point, I think that whether it's sort of in a general information tab or a glossary of terms type of thing, you should be able to fairly well define what things are and what they mean. And you could even go to the extent of sort of giving some criteria for level of importance related to each of the different purposes of the method, in terms of giving some guidance of what is required on the QA side, if you're just doing a discovery or screening or a monitoring or a modeling type of method. So overall, I think it looks like a great start. Nice job.
And also to Peter's point, I think it would be helpful to have that criteria of what's more important or less important. One thing that we mentioned in the last meeting is to be able to make sure that these methods are fit for use. So, some applications might have different requirements, or might be less needy in terms of data quality. They just want something qualitative or semi-qualitative, or semi-quantitative rather. So I think it's a great idea also to include something like that, where you say this is really important and this is maybe less important to have. Maybe not less important, because some people might not want to do it, but to have kind of a range of things so that the data reviewer or the end user of the data really, who maybe is not so technical or not familiar with laboratory methods, can evaluate the data and the methods and say, okay, this is probably going to give me a reasonable guess as to what's in my, my situation, or maybe it's going to be present or absent only, or that kind of range of knowledge. So I think that'd be very helpful. Also, yeah, I agree. This is great job, Judy. Thanks for this.
Yeah,
if I could add.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Sorry. Okay. I was just going to add, that what I find just great about this is it's a document that can work both ways. So it's something a laboratory could submit and say, this is what I'm presenting to you as a program. Can I use this method? But it's the other way as well, where the program can fill this out if they know specifically what type of criteria they want out of the method and say, this is what you have to provide me. And so that's what's fantastic about this, is it can go both ways. Like Carol said, is there's going to be probably some wordsmithing that's needed, or some added language to allow the non-savvy, non-laboratory speaking personnel to really kind of be able to understand what information is being provided. And obviously some of those exceptions to the rules with the big three, and where, this is a good start, but you have to really comply and follow the specified approval process defined by the program. So this is great though. Just kudos, great start. So.
Yeah, I'll comment with Andrew. Is it looks like a great start. And I think what we're gonna need moving forward, because really what we're trying to do with this document is we're trying to translate all of our laboratory science that all of the members of this group here are very familiar with, into more of the regulatory science side, of kind of like what are the considerations that we need to have when we're selecting one of these or reviewing one of these, and having it in a checklist is fantastic in terms of ease of use. But I think we are going to need some sort of mission statement at the beginning of our outline that says kind of like, look, this is what here's some documents, these are what you're going to use, and then we can touch on the if you're using a federal program, you got to use one of these other existing ones. And then these are also great references if you want to see more information on kind of what we need here. I think one of the areas that I'm going to say we should be cautious of is like we cannot or requires, or so like I'm seeing on the screen right now, single lab cannot be used by other laboratories. That's sort of true, but not necessarily true, right? It started at one laboratory. That means it hasn't gone through multi-lab, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used at another laboratory, right? That's just a way for the agency to kind of like categorize its fitness for use of like, well, it's only been done at one lab, so maybe I don't want to use this to search across the state, right? Maybe I want a multi-lab validated in order before I start looking everywhere. Or a single lab, I can use it just for this one site, and then we can have a bunch of labs that do this for the single site, and then we can compare there. So just kind of a word of caution that way.
So on that, what that may actually be is whether or not it's proprietary information or not. If a lab has developed something and the regulator loves it and they're going to use it, and the lab says, we want this proprietary, it cannot be used by another laboratory. It becomes business confidential.
Right. Yeah. The trade secret exceptions and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of brings to mind, maybe that's part of this mission statement that you were saying, because maybe what this needs to be made clear about this is, using this process is intended to be for emerging contaminants monitoring and use for environmental monitoring. And I'm not saying that laboratories should not be able to do proprietary things, but I think it's a different discussion on where that goes. Does that make sense? So when I look at the single lab on here, I think to myself, okay, single laboratory, one or more matrix, that's intended. And of course, under clean water, I mean, that's their language. But the way I read that intent is it's for the first lab or the first few labs or whatever that jump out there with the technology that thinks that they can monitor for PFAS or whatever it is they're monitoring for. And but if they do it using the criteria of this checklist, when they get to the end and they get it developed, and let's say it works and everybody likes the technology, then how easy is it going to be for them to move to tier 3? It's going to be very easy because they followed the criteria for tier 1 single use and proven that technology. So now to expand it to other laboratories, whether it be multi-lab, all labs, whatever it is you're trying to move to next, you've already met the basic criteria to get this done. And it's so much easier to get other labs to take on the responsibility and the cost to validate. Does that make sense? So I think I do agree on the coming up with a mission statement and the intended use for this. I also believe that we do also need to make sure that we address what Pam just brought up, which is on proprietary, so that it's understood how this is intended to be used.
I'll just throw a shot or a thought in here. I'll shoot a shot. I could see this checklist being part of an also written document. So the idea with the written document is we talk about, what the scope of this use should be. It could reference the other documents for like next stages. If you're going to go to RCRA with this, then you need to go to this document, that kind of thing. It could provide more of the information associated, and then it would have like a link to this spreadsheet, because I see people wanting to use this spreadsheet in a workable form, so that they could go in and check mark it or whatever. So I kind of see it as a combination of the two, some written explanation on what's going on that may not be specifically in a tab. Definitely, the reference documents, maybe the general information is more of a definitions page or something like that. But the general use of this document could be, or the general use of this checklist could be done in another document, and the two kind of brought together. If I don't know if I made myself, if what I said made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, how I envision this going is, you turn these Excel sheets into editable PDFs and you mount them inside of the full written document that goes through the narrative explanations of everything that we're talking about. And if you bookmark it the right way, you should be able to just click your way through and find the sheets that you need based on sort of the concept of the choose your own adventure type of thing. But I think absolutely the sheet shouldn't stand alone. There should be narrative guidance that goes with it in a formal written document that speaks to a lot of the points and use cases and concerns that are being brought up throughout this.
Yeah, and I agree with Peter. I think it'd be better served to, instead of having a link to this Excel document, having bookmarks in a PDF would be the move, and have people be able to edit that PDF and provide, the final PDF from this document to the regulator, to the end user, but also have that one document contain all of the definitions and the descriptions, the limitations, something that we talked about the last meeting, to make sure that it's abundantly clear what the limitations of these things are, what you can and can't do. All stuff I think should be in one document, so that it's not just easy to follow. I worry about having just the Excel spreadsheet, somebody finding the links, like, oh yeah, this should have to follow, do that, check those boxes, and it probably they might miss some stuff, I think, if we do it that way. So yeah, having one total document with bookmarks and having a choose your own adventure decision tree flowchart thing would work out great. I think, in my opinion, at least.
I mean, there are examples that sort of exist already, right? So I mean, in some of the, sort of NPDES general permits that exist, when you're filing your NOI, it walks you through, if you're in this use case, then you're going through these steps and you need to file under this area, and these are what your RPA challenges may be. So I think it's easy enough to put together, but I would keep the two together so that, like Augustine said, some adventurous person doesn't stumble upon this and say, oh, sweet, I'm a method developer now.
Hi, this is Sam. Yeah, I agree that there needs to be some kind of narrative that goes with this. I think, to me, it can potentially be misinterpreted. Like, for example, like if we're talking about multi-lab, well, someone can just go out, and if it's not specific, someone can just go out and say, well, I'm just going to pick 9 laboratories to work with. And, if you're shooting for a compliance method, but you're going to pick 9 research laboratories to do the method validation, well, that doesn't really work. So definitely need to have some narrative as part of this.
I'm going to make a suggestion, but maybe this is just because of lab background and how a lot of the water boards documents have this, but have all of the narrative ahead of time and then have the checklist as Appendix A or whatever. So that could be another way. And we have weird requirements for posting things to web pages, so that may be the way that it ends up looking like. I don't know all of the specific requirements off the top of my head. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes to mind listening to Sam speak is how we would make sure that we include the information that's necessary, as he was just pointing out with tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and how you would execute that. I think at some point with the guidance or even on the checklist, I think maybe you would have a directive is what I would envision, that before you embarked on that path, is that you would have already engaged with the agency, whatever agency that you're developing this for, because even when you do things for the Clean Water Act, I mean, before you go down it's smart. I'm not saying you have to do it, but it's smart to go ahead and engage with Lynn Walker or Adrian Henley or someone up in the office up there in DC on this ATP protocol, just simply because they like to give the approval on the direction that you're going. And if something gets to the point where it's going to be that widespread, the agency needs to be involved anyway. So I think some of the narrative that goes with this also does direct you at what point you need to be engaging in a conversation with your regulator.
That's excellent, Judy. I totally agree. We should have, like, if you're developing the method and you get to this point, whatever that point may be, go speak with the agency that you intend to present this to, or you intend to provide it to. So, it could be the water boards, it could be CDPH, it could be a whole bunch of different agencies. So whatever the agency that's going to use it. Yeah, I agree.
And I imagine that could be included. Sorry, real quick. I imagine that could be included in the mission statement as well, just up front. This is what you should be minimal doing. Sorry, Corinne, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's exactly what the procedure that I looked at requires. It's really a two-way conversation with the agency at all stages, and so that might be the procedure I looked at might be a good place to look at for language for that.
And I think it could also be useful for not just for regulatory things. Like Sam mentioned, that if it's something that's going to be used or some other widespread monitoring, of course, definitely. But even if it's something as simple as one of the regional boards wants something very specific done, it's probably a good idea to engage with them first and say, hey, what kind of things are you looking for? What do you want? What do you want the data to look like? Instead of putting in all this effort, doing all this stuff, giving them this fat packet of data, and it's not useful. So I think it is a good idea to engage them up front, just to make sure that what you're going to do makes sense.
Sam again, and that's where I think it's really important to also have a section where like there's resources available for those who want to develop a method. Well, this is the person I would need to go to from the State Water Board or from ELAP, or maybe here's a group of researchers that may have some familiarity in this area that we can maybe reach out to. So I think it's important to have like a resource section, and that needs to be updated on a regular basis.
I'm going to propose that one of the major resources should be ELTAC, because that really is the best group of laboratory experts that we have compiled in the state that all meet all at once.
And this document's going to stay with ELTAC, right, Christopher? I imagine this won't be a ELAP control document.
Right. ELAP will be hosting it on its webpage, but yes, it will fall to ELTAC to continually update it. I know we mentioned last meeting that we want to keep the frequency of those updates down, because we don't want to come back to this every year and be like, oh, we got to change all these names because all these people moved. So, I'd like it to have the specific person, but that might be too hard, too difficult to maintain for ELTAC to maintain. Like, here's a list of all the contacts and who you want to talk to. So that's why I'm like, ELTAC would be a good one, because that's general, it's going to be around. So
yeah, I think it makes sense just to have the resource for this kind of maybe clarification or whatever, just be the current ELTAC board. I imagine if we put the names of the groups, the folks on this call, and in 10 years phone calls like, hey, I'm developing Smith and you wrote this document, can you help me out? So it might be better just have the current ELTAC board, and I think it could be something that maybe every ELTAC cycle, every 2 years, they can look at it and make sure it's up to date or something. We can maybe build that into the document itself of a kind of review, maybe not an update timeline, but a review, just to make sure that it's still adequate for the use every 2 years or something. I don't know.
I wanted to step back on that idea that you had, Chris, as far as putting ELTAC as the advisory board, as far as, a lab is bringing them a method. I was just trying to picture how that would work with a lab coming and saying, I want you, ELTAC, to review my procedure. Am I on the right track? I'm not sure that that's really where ELTAC wants to be spending their resources. I mean, because with the limitations that we have with Bagley-Keene, we can't send that document around. I don't really see a individual lab getting that type of our focus on that. Perhaps if a regulator came and said, hey, can you help me establish these DQOs that I can put out there to the laboratories to meet? But I don't know that we want to be that first line of defense from, or the first line of support to the laboratories. I think that really does need to go back out to, Len Walker, Office of Drinking Water, those people, not us.
I was picturing it more of like, hey, I need help with how I'm following through with this. What are some points? And then you'd have one member of ELTAC go and act as a coach of like, oh yeah, we've done this before. Here's all the things that we did, and yeah, we can help you there. But no, I don't. I think you're right. I don't think we want ELTAC sitting and reviewing laboratory methods during the meetings, because that doesn't sound very productive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that responsibility should fall to the end user of the data. I mean, that should be the program manager of whatever it is should be reviewing data. It really shouldn't be ELTAC at all. I think you're right that we should make that clear up front, that it's not ELTAC's job is not to review methods for folks for approval. It should be the end user of the data, and ELTAC can help with using the document if necessary, or clarification on something that maybe is unclear when we put it together. Yeah, but not review methods. I agree. That totally would be a not productive use of our time.
and a potential conflict.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just to add to that, so it's interesting. I think I love the discussion because it seems like just like with anything else, this is a start of a new journey. And I think as we move along with this process, once we get to the place where we're all happy with the checklist and the references and the documents, so on and so forth, I think what'll end up happening, it'll be like a number of other processes that are out there where there will be frequently asked questions, and there will be things that will come up that we will be able to put an answer together for, that will answer things kind of in a specific way, because numbers of people will have the same question. And I think there will always be those questions that might need special attention or need some additional thought. But I think what will happen is in the initial stages of getting this rolled out and people starting to use it, is I think we'll have some great feedback that will allow us to put together some kind of canned statements and comments that goes along with the document. So where do we go from here?
So I think if this kind of checklist that you put together is great. I think it's something that maybe we want to expand it out to encompass the other disciplines. I think in the first meeting we talked about the 4 major disciplines that ELTAC kind of, or that ELAP kind of looks at, of toxicology, chemistry, micro, and radiochem. Do folks want to have a separate, and we talked about that in the first meeting, do folks want to have a separate list or checklist or list of requirements for each of those, or should we make it vague enough to apply to everything? This will go to Peter, but I am not with the talks, and I feel like a lot of these things might not be relevant in that field, so it might be better to have separate ones, but I'm open to input on that. I'm not sure what the group thinks.
Yeah, it's there's 2 ways to go about it in my existence of having to work with mostly chemists in my life, or engineers. You can do a rough translation of what the chemical criteria on here are into what the equivalents in, and I can only speak for toxicity and a little bit in micro, a 0 in radchem, of what these are, and you can kind of twist them a little bit to make them fit and apply. There's going to be a lot of NAs on here in terms of applying for toxin micro. Of it just doesn't fit and it doesn't exist and it's not needed, and there are going to be some things that don't exist on this list that are going to be needed. So I think the decision point is it simpler to add in the things that would cover the other disciplines into this list, thus making this list longer, or is it easier to just split it out and do it across the 4 disciplines, which will in the end make for a longer overall document that's in there, but make each individual one less complicated? I think if you made me choose right now, I would say it's easier to develop one of these for each of the disciplines. It will take more time. I think it'll be a cleaner product in the end, and easier for whoever is working on it, either from a regulatory side or from a laboratory side, to be able to click through the PDF and say, okay, well, I'm not developing a chemistry method, I'm not developing a micro method, I'm developing a toxicity method, go to that checklist section. So if I had to choose, that's the way that I would go about it. But if mine is the one that stands out the most, and radchem is pretty close to this and micro is kind of close to this, then I certainly can take us and twist it to make these different groups and areas work for toxicity.
In support of Peter's comment, even T and I understood the uniqueness of them And if you look at the TNI document, they have specificity for radiochem versus specificity of toxicology, that kind of thing. You know, and they spent a lot of time putting that document together, and I'm sure had many arguments. I would tend to trust their thought on that, and support the idea of having them separate by the four major types of tests.
I can
I
definitely, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I would say that TNI didn't really have arguments. They had separate subcommittees that addressed those. And that may be where we need to go, is build a basic framework and then divide it out. Okay, who has rad specialties, and you know who's dealing with tox, and build those out that way.
Well, they didn't have arguments, but they had some within the subcommittees. I remember specifically the chemistry committee. There was a number of controversial things that came up for it. But I do agree with you, Carol. I mean, it is. I mean, TNI did recognize it, and they do have specific committees because the expertise can be so different from what is known for chemistry versus what is needed for biology, tox, and radchem. So I do agree with that. And yeah, I mean, there's some things that, I mean, if you look at the very beginning of this list, there's some of the things that are going to apply all the way across the board, the justification, the reason why you're doing it, need to know a data user, who the eventual program is going to be. Those kinds of things are going to be the same all the way across the board. And then when you get down into the specifics, that's where it kind of needs to take a different pathway. So I'm supportive of however it makes the most sense to approach this, because I mean, at the end of the day, the product that we put out, we want it to be used, we want it to be effective, and we want it to do what the overall intent is moving forward.
And ultimately,
ahead,
what you could always do is say you have to complete worksheet 1, which is all the commonalities amongst all the disciplines. So, you know, who your user is, what's your identification of the technology, the purpose, that kind of stuff. And then say, okay, if you want microbiology, you need to do worksheet 2. If you want chemistry, you got to do worksheet 3. If you want rad, we could break it out that way. So we're not necessarily having the repetitiveness in each one of the forms.
Yeah, I was actually just going to agree with Carol that it would be helpful to have like a general application, general kind of list of things up front, and then the link Peter described, if you're doing talks or radio or whatever, go to these places. One thing that, and then also to bring up that aspect, is I want to make it as user-friendly as possible, right? If it's hard to use or people don't like using it, they're not going to want to use it. So if we can make it easy to digest, easy to follow, and easy to use, I think we'll get a lot of usage out of it, and people will like and appreciate using that document. One thing though that we might want to keep in mind is, while we have those big 4 categories of things that most stuff will fall into, there are going to be weird analytes or contaminants that don't fall in that. And I think last meeting, Christopher brought up like eDNA or microplastics, things like that, that would be tough to fit into one of those categories. And then you'll have to still say, oh, it kind of fits in micro, but not really, kind of fits in chemistry, but not really. So maybe we I don't know if we might want to have a everything else kind of list of general guidance of, if it doesn't fit in one of these 4 categories, can we put together a list of minimum criteria for a different type of measurement that we don't know of yet, or it hasn't been an issue yet?
Yeah, I think you're going to need another.
I think definitely is where ELTAC could come in. If there is something we haven't conceptualized yet. Microplastics, who guessed?
I'm going to say, in the absence of anything, sorry, I'll pass it over to Corinne right after this. In the absence, I like the general checklist, and I think maybe we can have a box of other and maybe just a giant text box of justify why this doesn't fit into one of the four, right? And so that you can have something there that would be able to fill out like it doesn't, we use this weird thing. So
Yeah. And you can even, the other tab can have sort of the very high level, like you have to have some sort of quality standards. You have to have some sort of data objectives. So it's still necessary. It may not fit into these very specific boxes that we have here, but, more of a free form, describe how you're going to, address repeatability, address precision, address accuracy for the other category.
yeah. And then Corinne.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that might be where Carol's idea of looking at what the kind of bare bones of all the procedures that we've looked at require and starting there.
And kind of along those lines of what Christopher mentioned of having a big text box of, why it doesn't fit in this category. Maybe we should have that for all the sections. Just like a description of for each of these, because they will be different. Like the requirements for asbestos is going to be different from micro, and toxicity different from radio and all that stuff. So yeah, I think this is a relevant or important thing to have in that general kind of application up front.
I'm going to hold up everyone. I'm going to ask to pause. It sounds like we've had a little bit of a trouble on the webcast. So I'm just going to have everyone hold for just a bit. Please see if the webcast gets back online. All right, there we go. We got confirmation that it's back up. So we just had a hiccup there. Sorry, everyone.
So I don't know if anybody else has any other comments. Christopher, should we move on to the next step in the agenda?
I don't have any
if, since we each have teams, Augustine has a team and I have a team, so we can individually, or our teams could come up with our ideas, so to speak, on a mission statement. His team could do the same, and then on the next meeting, we kind of bring that together and discuss it. Is that a good plan?
Absolutely. I think that's a great plan. By teams, you mean,
Like,
perhaps you could explain that a little bit more.
okay, like myself, Pam, Corey, and Carol are all on a team.
Okay.
Yeah, the teams are less than the quorum.
Yes,
But okay, as long as it's less than a quorum, that's fine.
it is.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so then I guess for the first action, we can do that. We'll work on a mission statement. And if Judy, your group wants to put together something of what you guys think, we can compare notes at the next meeting and put it all together in just one item.
Okay.
Cool. And for the checklist, I feel like this is a lot of effort to put on you because it's obviously a lot of work. Is this something that we can break up? Can we, I guess, can we volunteer Peter to put together the talk stuff and like, distribute the tasks a little bit, or how do you want to do that, Judy?